in a moment, when you look to the right, we'll get a beautiful view of Jerusalem and of the golden dome of the rock, which stands where the temple would have stood at the time of Jesus. So that golden dome stands where the temple would have stood at the time of Solomon and at the time of Jesus. So we're now going through a tunnel through the top of the Mount of Olives. The Mount of Olives is about 800 meters high. And as we travel down towards the Jordan, going down into the East African Rift Valley, we're going to be dropping to a depth of 430 meters below sea level. So we'll be dropping about 1,200 meters as we go down this road. If you look off to our left at this kind of desert land, you can see that there's little tufts of grass, little tufts of bush that are growing. This is about as green and lush and fertile as it gets out here in the desert. This is the time shortly after the rain at the moment. In the summer here it's very brown and very dry. But this is the landscape where David would have been herding sheep, where the shepherds would have been watching their flocks by night. The sheep can't stay still long in this landscape because otherwise they will eat all the food that's there. Off to our right you can see a shepherd now with a flock of sheep. Off to our right you can see a Bedouin encampment of these folks who live out here in the desert and often are involved with herding animals through this area. Of course, the Judean wilderness is the area where Jesus came, where he was led by the Spirit to face temptation by Satan. So this is the area where Jesus would have been when he was facing that temptation. We read about it in Matthew chapter 4, verses 1 to 14, verses 1 to 11. Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the desert to be tempted by the devil. After first fasting for 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. The tempter came to him and said, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread." Jesus answered, "It is written, man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. "If you are the Son of God," he said, "throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift you up in their hands, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone." Jesus answered him, "It is also written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Again the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. "All this I will give you," he said, "if you will bow down and worship me." Jesus said, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." And the devil left him, and angels came and attended him. Where are you from? From England, and some from Lithuania, and some from Africa. All over the world. So Psalm 63 is a psalm that we know that David wrote while he was in the Judean wilderness. And this is what he says. "O God, you are my God. Earnestly I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My body longs for you in a dry and weary land where there is no water." So you can see why this is a very dry and weary land, isn't it? You feel the moisture being sucked out of your body. Now this is the Desert of Judea. But David says, just as my body longs for water here, so my soul longs for you, O Lord. So this is the setting where Jesus would have been for his temptations. And then if you look down that way, you can see a flat area. Do you see? That's the Jordan Valley, that's the plains of the Jordan. And beyond it, you can see the mountains rising up the other side. That's the mountains of Moab on the other side of the Jordan. Okay. Now down there, can you see some palm trees and some growth down on the plain? That's the area around Jericho. Jericho known as the City of Palm. This way you can see a few buildings. And we've just driven from that way. Which town have we left? Which town have we left?
No.
Jerusalem.
Jerusalem, thank you.
Jerusalem.
So Jerusalem's up this way, Jericho's down this way. So get ready to hold your breath because we're about to go underwater. 3, 2, 1. So we are now below the level of the sea. If we were anywhere else in the world, we would be underwater. But this area is so dry that the water all evaporates off, and the water flowing into this area is flowing down the Jordan, and there's not enough to fill this area up, and so instead we have the Dead Sea which we'll see in a few minutes. So we're still going to drop another 400 meters from sea level down to the shoreline of the Dead Sea. It's the lowest point on the surface of the earth. But we're on our way to visit some very interesting people. The community that lived at Qumran. They were living here at the time of Jesus, and visiting them helps us understand more about the culture at the time of Jesus, the sophisticated water engineering at the time of Jesus, and why we can have such confidence that what we're reading is the same Old Testament that Jesus read. In 1947, a young lad, like some of the boys that we've seen today looking after their sheep, had lost one of his sheep. And being a good shepherd, he set out to try and find his sheep. And he was looking here and he was looking there when he came to a cave. He didn't want to go in, so he took a stone and he threw it in there to try and share the sheep out, just in case it was in there. He didn't find his sheep, but he heard the sound of some pottery breaking. The next day he went back with a friend to explore the cave. And they found these big old pots, which they took to an antiquities dealer in Bethlehem. And the antiquities dealer said, I'll give you a few shekels for them. But when he opened it up, he found inside some ancient scrolls. And as scholars looked at them, they realized that these dated right back to before the time of Jesus. Some were from about 100 years before Jesus, others were from about the time of Jesus. And what was amazing was that these were actually, some of them were copies of the Bible, of the Old Testament, bits like the prophet Isaiah. This led to a big rush to search all the caves around here. And gradually more and more bits of the Old Testament were found until bits had been found of every book except for the book of Esther. And this was a wonderful discovery because up to this point the oldest copies we had of the Old Testament dated from about 1,000 years after the time of Jesus. And people had asked, can we really trust that we're reading the same Old Testament as Jesus? Maybe it's been twisted and changed over the years, it's been passed on by generation to generation. But these copies showed us they hadn't. They'd been very accurately and faithfully copied for many generations. That even when we found copies that were older than the time of Jesus, they were almost identical to the copies that we had from 1,000 years later. And this reinforced our confidence that the Bible that we're reading today, the Old Testament that we're reading today, is the same Old Testament that Jesus read. So when Jesus said, it is written, and when he's arguing with Satan and said that is the end of the argument, if the Old Testament says it is true, then we find that we have the same scriptures that Jesus had, and so we should treat them with the same respect that he did. So these scrolls are known as the Dead Sea Scrolls because they were found so close to the Dead Sea. Why did these guys want to come and live out here in the desert? I mean, this is pretty a barren, inhospitable place. So these guys thought that things in Jerusalem had gone wrong and got corrupted, and as a result, they moved out here into the desert to try and start a new, pure community. So when Jesus criticised things in Jerusalem and said that they had become corrupt and gone wrong, he wasn't the only person saying this. So we got writing and we've got whinging. These guys wrote lots of interesting stuff and they complained lots about things in Jerusalem. But the third reason that these guys are interesting is because of washing. They had lots of baptismal pools where they would wash themselves each day to try and become clean and pure. So some people have said this is a lot like Christianity with Christian baptism. But actually it's very different. The symbolism is similar, the idea of washing and cleansing. But can you think what the big difference is between their washings and Christian washing? The difference is that they did it every day, whereas as Christians we do it once. Because they were feeling they had to clean themselves every day, whereas Christians we know that we have been cleaned by the work of Jesus. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And so the rain comes rushing down, and what they did was they built a dam on that valley, which directed the water round, and then brought the water round here, and then it came all the way through their little settlement here along an aqueduct. And they stored the water in places like this cistern here. Does that make sense? Yeah. So this is what it would have looked like here, guys. So in the middle of the desert, you can see there's lots of water around it, and there's water stored in it, and yeah, as the water would come into this place here, and then come rushing all the way through and around to the other end here. So we're up here at the moment, and there would have been all this water stored here that they could use for growing plants and that sort of thing around here. So they were very sophisticated, very clever in the way they used water. The area around here, meaning that they could grow palm trees and things like that. Even though it's a very dry area and palm trees need lots of water, they could store so much water that they were able to grow palm trees. So there's evidence here of them making date honey out of the dates here. So it shows they were growing palms here. Amazing, eh? So they weren't unsophisticated. They were very, very sophisticated in what they were doing. In England at the time, we were very, very unsophisticated. We had nothing like this. So this is all from the time of Jesus, guys. We've no evidence that Jesus ever came here, or that John the Baptist ever came here, or anyone like that. But these guys would have been around at the time of Jesus. And this is their dining room. This is where they were hoping to one day have dinner with the Messiah. So they believed the Messiah would come, but actually they didn't believe that the Messiah would come. They believed the Messiahs would come. They read the Old Testament, and in the Old Testament they saw prophecies that there would be a priest and a king coming. And so they said, well, you can't have someone who's a priest and a king, because the priest has to be descended from Moses, from Aaron. The king has to be descended from David. So they said there must be two Messiahs coming. They hadn't reflected enough on Melchizedek, who was a king and a priest, and Hebrews 7 tells us that Jesus is the fulfillment of Psalm 110 verse 4, which says that he will be a king and a priest. So even though Jesus isn't a descendant of Aaron, he's a priest because he's a different sort of priest, a Melchizedek priest rather than a Levite priest. But this is where they would have had their dinners and where they were hoping to one day have dinner with the Messiah. And sadly, as far as we can tell, they missed him. There's no evidence anyone from this community ever turned to Jesus. Though they may have done, of course, we don't know. But there would have been about 300 people living here. One day they knew the Romans were coming to attack. They'd already destroyed Jerusalem, and now they were going to come and destroy here. And so they took the most precious things they had, which were their scrolls, and they hid them in the caves around here, saying, even if we are killed, we won't let anyone desecrate our copies of the Word of God. So if you come here in the winter, it can be snowing up in Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is so high, it's 700 meters high, but down here it can be 20, 25 degrees when there's snow in Jerusalem. Off to our left, you can see some high mountains that are in the country of Jordan. Sometimes it can be snowing there and 25 degrees here. And this area over there would have been Moab during Bible times. So you can see how it's very high and would have a different climate to here. So if you remember, Ruth went from Bethlehem to Moab because there was famine in Bethlehem, no bread in Bethlehem. So Moab isn't far away, but it's a very different climate. We're on our way now to the fortress of Masada. And it's a fascinating place for us as people who love the Bible for 4 reasons. Firstly, because it gives us an insight into this landscape. It's a beautiful landscape, but very different to what I'm used to. London isn't much like this. And so coming here, in particular coming to Masada, which gives beautiful views over this area, helps me picture the sort of landscape in which many Bible things happened. But secondly, it's interesting because it gives us an insight into the mind of King Herod the Great. Herod the Great was ruling when Jesus was born. And sometimes people say, can you really believe that Herod would kill all those babies in Bethlehem? That would be a crazy thing to do. But it was exactly the sort of thing that Herod did. Herod was convinced that everyone was out to get him. He was paranoid. And with good reason. Lots of people did want to kill him. The people he was ruling over didn't like him. He was an Edomite who had converted to Judaism, and many of them didn't really believe that he was a proper Jew. His neighbouring country was Egypt, and Egypt, Cleopatra wanted this land. The main man who protected him was the Roman Mark Antony, but Cleopatra was sleeping with Mark Antony, so that made Herod nervous. Then Mark Antony was killed by his rival for power in Rome, Octavius, and Herod didn't know whether the Romans would be for him or against him. So he was worried about his people, worried about his neighbours, worried about his protectors. He was also worried about his family. He was convinced his sons were trying to kill him and take the throne. He had 8 sons and he executed 4 of them. He had a wife called Mariamne. He married her because she was a princess and it made him a more legitimate king. And also because she was very beautiful. But then one day he was convinced she was trying to kill him, so he throttled her to death with his own hands. Octavius, the emperor of Rome, said, I would rather be King Herod's pig than his son. Because he didn't eat pigs, because he kept a kosher diet, and he killed his sons quite regularly. So Herod was paranoid, he was convinced everyone was trying to kill him. And so he built some amazing fortresses as places that he could retreat to if people were to attack him. And Masada was kind of a nuclear bunker that he could retreat to and feel safe there because no one could attack him. It's a plateau surrounded by 1,000-foot cliffs, and up the top he built some beautiful palaces. And inside he dug out some big cisterns so vast amounts of water could be stored there. This fits very well with the character that we see in the Gospels when he kills the children. He is paranoid, he's convinced that there might be a little baby who's been born, and therefore he must kill him so that he can't become king. He's very, very rich, and that's what we see here, because there are these luxurious palaces that he never came to, but were ready for him in case people tried to kill him. So it helps us understand the wealth, craziness and ambitiousness of King Herod. But the third reason it's fascinating is because it helps us understand the Zealots, who were a political movement around at the time of Jesus. They wanted to throw the Romans out and set up a new independent Jewish kingdom here. Their main strategy was violence and terrorism. After the time of Jesus, about 30 years after the time of Jesus, there was a big upsurge in nationalism here. And the Zealots rode that wave of nationalism and led a rebellion against Rome. And some of the first Zealots to lead that thought, where can we get some weapons? I know Herod has lots of weapons stored at Masada. Herod was long dead by this stage, but the weapons were still there. And so by a trick, they got the defenders of Masada to let them in, and they got all the weapons, and they led the rebellion against Rome. But the men who were running it from Masada were very dangerous men, and so their leader was executed by some of the other leaders because he was considered too dangerous. He was killing lots of innocent people. So his followers retreated to Masada, and at Masada they thought they'd be safe. They didn't play much part in the war against Rome anymore, but instead they raided villages like this village here at Gedi, which we're about to drive past. But after the Romans had defeated the people in Jerusalem, they thought, we need to deal with these guys out here in the desert of Masada. There are 1,000 of them in the fortress of Masada, so the Romans marched down here with 10,000 troops. And they built a big camp around the bottom of Masada, and built a big siege wall so that no one could escape. Then they thought, how do we capture Masada? We can't attack up these big cliffs. What can we do? So what they did was build a massive ramp, which meant that they could then attack up a nice gradual gradient with lots of men and attack Masada. But once the Romans had built this big ramp, they then went to attack the Zealots. And what happens next is a bit controversial. Josephus tells the story that as the Romans came to attack, they then stopped and went back for the night. And the leader of the people, of the Zealots, got them together and said to them, what shall we do? The Romans are going to capture us by morning. I don't want to see our children becoming slaves. So he said, okay, here's the plan. All the men go home and kill your families. And so they went home and killed their families and then came back and drew lots. And 10 men were chosen by lot, and they killed all the other men. Then one man was chosen by lot and he killed the other 9 men. And then he committed suicide. So everyone died, but only one of them committed suicide. Because these people were written off as crazy people for many years. But then, once the country of Israel came into existence, these guys were held up as heroes and celebrated. And so today, many units of the Israeli army come here for their swearing-in ceremonies and swear that Masada shall never fall again. So this is a fascinating place. It teaches us a lot about the mind of King Herod and about the mind of the nationalists at the time of Jesus. So in Psalm 104 we read about a scene that's reminiscent of En-Gedi. He makes springs pour water into the ravines. It flows between the mountains. They give water to all the beasts of the field. The wild donkeys quench their thirst. The birds of the air nest by their waters. They sing among the branches. He waters the mountains from his upper chambers. The earth is satisfied by the fruit of his work. He makes grass grow for the cattle and plants for man to cultivate, bringing forth food from the earth. Wine that gladdens the heart of man, oil to make his face shine, and bread that sustains his heart. The trees of the Lord are well watered, the cedars of Lebanon that he planted. There the birds make their nests. The stork has its home in the pine trees. The high mountains belong to the wild goats. The crags are a refuge for the conies. And in 1 Samuel 24, we read about an amazing incident that happened here at En-Gedi. 1 Samuel chapter 24, which is where David spares Saul's life. David was on the run from Saul. Saul was unjustly pursuing him. David wrote lots of his psalms when he was in that sort of situation. And in 1 Samuel 24 we read about one of those times. And this is what we read. After Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told David is in the desert of Gedi. So Saul took 3,000 chosen men from all Israel and set out to look for David and his men near the crags of the wild goats. We'll see why this area is called that in a moment. He came to the sheep pens along the way. A cave was there and Saul went in to relieve himself. David and his men were far back in the cave. The men said, "This is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish." Then David crept up unnoticed and cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Afterwards, David was conscience-stricken for having cut off a corner of his robe. He said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lift my hand against him, for he is the anointed of the Lord." With these words, David rebuked his men and did not allow them to attack Saul. And Saul left the cave and went his way. Then David went out of the cave and cried out to Saul, "My lord, the king!" When Saul looked behind him, David bowed down and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. He said to Saul, "Why do you listen when men say David is bent on harming you? This day you have seen with your own eyes how the Lord gave you into my hands in the cave. Some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not lift my hand against my master, because he is the Lord's anointed. See, my father, look at this piece of your robe in my hand. I cut off the corner of your robe, but did not kill you. Now understand and recognize that I am not guilty of wrongdoing or rebellion. I have not wronged you, but you are hunting me down to take my life. May the Lord judge between you and me, and may the Lord avenge the wrongs you have done to me. But my hand will not touch you. As the old saying goes, from evildoers come evil deeds, so my hand will not touch you. Against whom has the king of Israel come out? Whom are you pursuing? A dead dog, a flea? May the Lord be our judge and decide between us. May he consider my case and uphold it. May he vindicate me by delivering me from your hand.
Susigokit sekundę visi, jau fotkinu, dar kartoju.